DC Comics claim that they're all in after this past week. We got the DC All In special. We got the Absolute Universe kicking off in earnest next week. And that's not enough. In fact, they're going bigger than you could possibly imagine. The one thing that they could do that would blow people's minds away is happening in early 2025, reported by Bleeding Cool. The Batman Hush team of Jim Lee and Jeph Loeb are returning to the ongoing Batman comic book in March or April of 2025. They were originally expected to return in November or December and increased the schedule for Chip Zdarksky's run to finish it. Then the schedule changed once again. To accommodate the change, Batman 154 is 2 weeks late. Batman 155 has been pushed to 4th of December, a month late, and Batman 157 has slipped from December of 2024 all the way to the 5th of February 2025. And some people might have noticed that they were making these changes apparently to accommodate a new creative team on Batman. And even more exciting, Jim Lee is one of the creators. And I'm obviously excited about Jeph Loeb as well, because I think he's a wonderful writer. But Jim Lee returning to an ongoing series is literally something I thought I would never see again. I thought he would come back for a mini-series here or there. Certainly he's doing lots of covers, but he is literally the president of the company at this point, and he has a lot of responsibilities throughout Warner Brothers and certainly DC Comics. Did not see this one coming. I did mention, however, that I expected a new Batman creative team, once All In kicked off, and I was surprised Chip Zdarsky was sticking around because by all accounts, and the measurements that we do have are not great, the information that was available did indicate that sales and interest in Batman were waning under Chip Zdarsky. It wasn't exactly a popular run, so I figured they were probably going to make a change, and I was surprised when they didn't. Apparently they meant to, but they weren't able to quite get it out in time. And if DC wanted to do something to prove that they were all in, to do something that would get people excited, to jumpstart Batman to being the #1 selling comic book in the entire industry again for a while, this was the move to make. I cannot stress how badass this is. Let's fucking go. Jim Lee, once again, on a Batman ongoing series is going to be amazing news. Now, a lot of you are like, wait, Jim Lee tends to be late a lot. The last time he was on an ongoing, he finished half an issue, and then he didn't go any further. Someone actually finished the first issue and he never came back for the second one. Apparently, Jim Lee and DC Comics had similar concerns about this and have already prepared and mitigated the possibility of that potentially happening. Jim Lee has been drawing comic books since the spring, and a number of issues have already been completed. But apparently DC would like to get a few more issues under the belt so we don't get the same problems that have plagued Jim Lee's comics in the past, especially considering his duties as chief creative officer, publisher, and president of DC Comics. However, working on this comic is a major part of the reason that Jim Lee signed up with DC for a considerable period rather than jumping ship to Marvel Comics for the X-Men relaunch, which we talked about with Doc a few weeks ago. And if you're interested in more information about that, I will give you that opportunity at the end of this video. But let's get through this one first, because Marvel did want Jim Lee to return to become an ongoing artist and really the head of X, if you will, for the X-Men relaunch. They didn't want Tom Brevoort. They actually wanted Jim Lee to do it. And he ended up re-signing with DC Comics, kind of leveraged them against each other. But I never would have imagined it was so he could do an ongoing series as the artist once again. It's been a very, very long time since Jim Lee had the time to do this. And I think it's very, very smart that they keep that in mind and actually get 5 or 6 issues in the can before they go out with this, because Jim Lee does get late on a lot of comic books. He can't really keep up with a monthly schedule. And I don't imagine Jim Lee coming back as the ongoing artist for Batman is a long-term strategy that he will be able to implement. But if he comes back for 12 issues in 1 year, that is probably enough time to get people really, really excited about Batman once again. Maybe try some of those other titles that are waning at the moment. DC doesn't have a lot of hotness going on. We do have Absolute Batman coming out, which I do think will do strong numbers for at least the first 18 months. Don't have as high hopes for Absolute Superman or Wonder Woman, but we shall see with that. But there are at least some interesting things going on, and they finally have that headline. As excited as I am for Philip Kennedy Johnson doing Batman and Robin, and I can tell you right now, because I've already seen the book, you want to read that book. And if you don't have it on your pull list, you should. And as excited as I am for Chris Condon on Green Arrow, more of a lesser-known commodity when it comes to superheroes, and as excited as I am for a new creator on Nightwing and Titans and some of these other things, there wasn't really a headliner. Maybe the closest thing they could have got to that when it came to the Prime universe, like that headlining thing that, you know, Scott Snyder being on Absolute Batman was like Tom Taylor taking over Detective Comics. But me personally, I find that more of a detriment and a reason not to read than actually to come back. Jim Lee coming back as a full-time artist on a DC book, specifically Batman, is a reason to go to your comic book shop every single fucking month. And hopefully he gives you more reasons to come back every single week. And I do believe Jeph Loeb will keep up his end of the deal, because we did get that first issue of Batman, The Long Halloween, The Last Halloween with Eduardo Rizzo, and it was chef's fucking kiss. It was a very, very good comic book. Clearly, Jeph Loeb has more Batman stories to tell, and it sounds like they've been brewing this up and thinking about it and mapping it out for quite some time. Job well done. Now, when it comes to Chip Zdarsky, there were signs out there that something was changing. His books were being pushed back, and he actually did go out on his Substack and address that. Speaking of Batman, news slipped out this week about issue 154 being pushed back 2 weeks on the release schedule. Normally, I don't comment on such things because I'm above it, but I just want everyone to know that this has nothing to do with any creative delays on our part. Issues 153 and 154 are done. Heck, 155 is being colored right now. So this is separate from anyone working on the book. It's a publishing decision far beyond my pay grade. I'm just a writer. Leave me alone. It doesn't sound like Chip Zdarsky is very happy with this change on Batman. And I do remember when he took over the role, which I was very in favor of, by the way, because I thought he had done a very good job on his first half of his Daredevil run. I didn't quite see things going off the rails as quickly as it has on Chip Zdarsky's Batman, that he did say he was going to be around for at least 3 years. That's clearly not the case anymore. Plans have changed because Batman is, quite frankly, a stale comic book under Chip Zdarsky. Fantastic art by Jorge Jimenez, but Jorge Jimenez can only do so much. He can only make so many not great stories, at least palpable, because of what you're looking at. Eventually, when you don't nail the character and you aren't delivering stories people want to read, they are going to fall off, and that's absolutely what has happened to Batman, kind of like at the end of the Tom King run, where people kind of realized this isn't going to get better. You know, it started out pretty good with Failsafe. I really do enjoy that opening arc. They made him a little bit too OP, and then everything just kind of goes to shit on that series. And, you know, you get that Gotham War event, which was downright embarrassing. Chip Zdarsky should be embarrassed of himself. And really, you can blame no one but himself for his plight right now, not being the Batman writer anymore, starting in early 2025, because it sounded like it was his idea to bring in Titty Howard and do a Batman crossover event with Catwoman. You went out there and partnered with a terrible writer while you were already struggling. What did you think was going to happen with your Batman series? It did, quite frankly, feel like he was saying goodbye to Batman like 2 months ago, or actually, I guess it was more like 4 months ago, with the final issue he did before Absolute Power started, and it started tying into that. That felt like a goodbye, and I was like, why is he still on this book? Obviously, he's treading water, and he's just trying to get to a place where Jim Lee and Jeph Loeb can take over, and it doesn't sound like he's happy about that. But Chip Zdarsky is a weird dude. He has a weird sense of humor, and maybe he's trying to be funny. But it sounds to me like he's not exactly happy with the change, but I can't imagine any Batman fans out there not being excited that we're swapping out Chip Zdarsky for Jeph Loeb. Jeph Loeb is a much better writer in his prime, and certainly even today with that last issue he did with The Last Halloween, than what Chip Zdarsky is doing with Batman. Jorge Jimenez is an amazing artist. Jim Lee is Jim fucking Lee. Now, I don't know if that's a downgrade or an upgrade, but it's certainly a parallel move to an absolute legend within the comic book industry. And I don't know what to say about Chip Zdarsky's Batman run. We'll probably do a retro on there. But I will say this week specifically, I was telling my friends, I was like, after reading that issue, it felt like the issue of Daredevil, where you had the conversation with Daredevil and Iron Man on the roof. And ever since that moment, his Daredevil run went to shit. I was like, it felt like that moment here. And this is the right move, because Chip Zdarsky's Batman was going absolutely nowhere. Speaking of the history of Jeph Loeb and Jim Lee together, in 2002, Batman Hush ran in Batman 608 to 619. DC editorial would have preferred it have been a separate miniseries, but Jim Lee insisted that it be in the regular comic book, like Batman Year One and Uncanny X-Men. Jim Lee said that he would make his first issue sell like a #1 instead, and it did. What will they do this time? Is it going to be Batman 158 or Batman #1? Me personally, my suspicions are that this is going to be a Batman 1. I don't think anything that Chip Zdarksy or Tom King really set up, or even James Tynion or Josh Williamson in his very short stint on Batman, has been so enormously popular or successful or even memorable at this point that you wouldn't want to just start it over with the #1 issue. You win 150. That's a pretty damn good number in today's comic book climate. Nobody really goes over 50, and you went up to over 150. That's a pretty sweet number there. Go to a #1. You got Jim Lee returning. You probably don't need to because of that, but you'll get a lot of variant covers out there. And I imagine whether it's Batman 158 or Batman #1, that this will be the #1 selling comic book that month by far. This should do bigger numbers than TMNT that had 300,000 orders for TMNT #1 with Jason Aaron. It should certainly easily eclipse what Scott Snyder has been able to do with Absolute Batman, which I guess went over 200,000 and might be creeping towards 250,000 with the second printing. And you're like, Wes, how could there be a second printing? They print everything to order these days. In fact, they do the second printing at the same time as the first printing. But apparently the orders have creeped up closer to 250,000. But it will eclipse that as well because it's Jim fucking Lee. And Jim Lee is an absolute superstar. And I do think at this point it warrants a #1. Batman needs a refresh. It needs a reboot because Batman has gotten very stale. Not a lot of people are looking forward to Detective Comics these days anyway. Jeph Loeb coming back. So I'm very, very excited. This is a best case scenario, in my opinion. 2 fucking legends coming back to the most important comic book at DC Comics to actually put a stamp of approval on DC All In that it is important because they are bringing out the big guns. They brought out a fucking legend that I thought would never, ever do an ongoing series again. In fact, Doc also believed that. Obviously, he's the world's biggest Jim Lee fan because he's the biggest X-Men fan. And he and I talked about that, where there had been rumors that he might return to X-Men, and apparently he was playing DC and Marvel off each other. That video is right here if you want some more Jim Lee covers that came out not too long ago. This was a lot of fun to record, and you get Doc's perspective on Jim Lee himself.